and educational equity. Her extensive research has appeared in books and journals such as the Journal of Higher Education, Qualitative Inquiry, Diversity in Higher Education, and the Review of Higher Education, in which she is co-editor. Previously, Dr. Pasque served as department head and professor at North Carolina State University, as well as an endowed professor and named Researcher of the Year while at the University of Oklahoma. While on sabbatical, Dr. Pasque also had experience with grand rounds at the University of Michigan. Welcome, Dr. Pasque.
Thank you very much, Joanne. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm glad this is a smaller group so that we can have more of an intimate conversation and really get into any questions that you have about focus groups for your particular research projects. And so I'll save that to the end, but do want to get started and share some information with you. I appreciate the invitation and to be here. I teach qualitative research on a regular basis in the College of Education and Human Psychology, as Joanne mentioned, and also am a part of the QualLab, run that. I guess what happened prior to my arrival 2 years ago at Ohio State was they were big on quantitative, but not necessarily qualitative. And so my goal at the college and also across campus is to really elevate the conversations and the rigor, if you will, of qualitative inquiry. So I'm glad to be here. And this is a little bit about QualLab. We have a dashboard of resources for people in the college. We do one-on-one consultations and things like that, but there are videos and different sessions, different resource guides that are available to everyone. So that's where you would find that if you are interested, and of course, follow us on Twitter. So I wanted to start about data collection. What are the different ways to collect data? And there are so many different ways. And today we're going to focus in, obviously, on focus groups, but I just wanted to kind of show a slide of all the various ways that, you know, structured or fixed or semi-structured. There's also ways where people do CIRT walking interviews or have a meal, a focus group with a meal where people are creating the food together and talking in living room and kitchen space together, and it's a little more casual, to the more formal focus groups where people are sitting together, questions are asked and answered in that space. And so we'll dive into focus groups today, but before we do, I wanted to ask 2 poll questions. So the first one, because I think the poll isn't really working, but you do have access to the thumbs up and the thumbs down. So I would say if you could give us a thumbs up if you have come across any recent research studies that use focus groups to collect data. Anybody? Pop your thumb up. All right, I see Janet and Tanya. Excellent. Thank you so much. It's just good to know if you've seen it out there in the literature. I'm going to ask a second question now about, have you considered a focus group for your own research projects and interests? So Janet, again, thank you. That's great. Tanya, and excellent. Very helpful. Thank you for the interaction. And as we go, if you would like to unmute yourself, feel free. It's a small group where we can just ask questions and as we go, as well as at the end, I'll leave plenty of time for that. But I, of course, love the interaction, including with you, Joanne. So if you're thinking this group that you know better than me is interested in something, let me know. So with focus groups, I have resources and references, but I kind of wanted to walk you through some of the basics. So when you're designing a focus group, your interview protocol or focus group protocol that you would submit to IRB and then use would absolutely follow the arc of the interview and focus group process. You would have an arc, right? Start with the introductions and the lower risk kinds of things. Then you would move on to more medium risk, and then the deep discussion questions that really get toward your research questions. That's when you would really kind of get into that conversation and the deep, more risky conversations there. And then you want to make sure that you're resolving it, wrapping up, making sure people are feeling good about the experience. And if you have resources, here's counseling center, here's follow-up medical services that you've put forward in your IRB, that's when you would do that. So here's a resource for you about some focus groups. Also, I think I want to kind of talk about researcher decision points, your researcher decision points. And I think one of the really exciting things about focus groups, and I've done a research study where I did interviews and then focus groups and really talked about the differences between them and what can you get out of a focus group that you can't get out of an interview. If you can get it from an interview, excellent. But what I found, and it's also consistent throughout the literature, is not only do people share the information that you're interested in, but they also start to engage with each other to deepen what they're sharing and offering to you, but they also can really relive that experience as well. So let me be more specific. So when I worked with a number of women across generations who are in leadership positions across the field of higher education, vice presidents for research, vice presidents for student affairs, and different fields and disciplines like that, they came together to talk about that experience and they shared information. Oh, back when I was a leader 20 years ago, here's what we did. But then they talked about mentoring and started to actually mentor in the group. Oh, you want to be in the Boston area? That's really difficult to get in the Boston area. Let me share with you some ideas. Let me give you my phone number and we can connect, right? So in a focus group environment, not only do you get the information that you're trying to get, but you can actually have people relive or do the interactions like mentoring and connections and in the group with each other. So those interactions between participants become quite important and vital. And if you're not interested in that, then, you know, sometimes interviews might be able to do it for you. So let's say you've decided, yes, I want that interaction. I want to be a great facilitator of focus groups. What are the things I need to do? Well, focus group protocol development is one, participant engagement, another, thinking about before and after the focus group, the moderator's role, and then the observer's role. So here's just a few things that I'd like to kind of pull out to talk about today. In terms of focus group protocol development, I think, of course, the beginning, you're introducing yourself and the observers that you might have in the room. You're the, let's say you're the person who is the moderator. You're going to make sure potentially that you have a co-moderator or people who are observing throughout the room. How does that not seem obtrusive in the space? Do you videotape the space and then go back and watch and write field notes while you're doing it? Think about all these different roles and how you want that all to come together in a seamless way. And so again, just like an interview, you want to look at the arc of the focus group from the conversation and development. Some people even put their interview and focus group protocol in sections to match that. Of course, open-ended questions. You want the conversation to really go in a lot of detail. And then also, I think it's really important, and that sounds so basic, but ask one question at a time. It's so there's so many times that you as a researcher will get really excited and you're starting to do analysis in your head as you're facilitating. However, the participant might not be at the same level you are with this research. Of course they're not, right? So making sure you're asking one question at a time and you're not flying through questions or giving them too much in your question, and you chunk that out for your participants so that they can receive clear questions and really work with you in answering all those questions. So let me give you a couple examples in terms of how to really get rich participant engagement. I think a lot of times it's the topic. I'm currently involved in a research project with Dr. Sarah Lang in human sciences and some other people who work in early childhood education. I'm in higher ed. My field is colleges and universities and organizational behavior and things like that. But their work is in K-12, early childhood. And they're interested in parents and also teachers in those environments and what's happening with diversity and inclusion in those spaces and what's also not happening in those spaces in order to then put together some training materials for teachers moving forward. So part of my work with that group, we were talking about what are you after? What would help parents and teachers really talk about issues of diversity in a really deep way? And we decided on vignettes. And so what they do is they have a PowerPoint up first, and then there's pictures of children and parents and teachers engaging in a certain scenario. And then the question is really around the picture. What do you see here? What's happening in terms of race? What's happening in terms of ethnicity? What's happened for you? That really is the springboard then, because sometimes it's easier to talk about something else first versus what's really happened to you. So these vignettes are a great way to have the group enter the conversation, and the actual visual of the PowerPoint picture is a nice way to do it. There's also ranking exercises, kind of like polls. Okay, rank these things and then talk about it as a group. So you're giving participants an exercise first, so that way they're kind of into it. Their brains are there. We all have very full lives. So making sure people are with you and thinking about what's going on. Sometimes people do free listing or brainstorm activities, shout it out, and I'm going to write it up on newsprint as we go. And then everybody gets these ideas out. You can also get a sense of who's talking a lot, who's talking a little bit, what is really on people's minds and things like that. So rating things is another thing. Pile sorting. I actually had with a doctoral student, she had people draw pictures. So it was faculty in residence who live on college campuses in beautiful apartments across the country. And they're engaged with undergrads in the residence halls as they and their families live there. So she actually had everybody draw that faculty in residence experience. So first, I'm going to give you a picture of somebody who is talking about their dogs. And I love my dog. I feed my dog. It gives me warmth. I'm drawing these pictures and these relationships and kind of mapping out the dogs and my relationship with dogs. Here's the example. Now I'd like you to do this for your faculty in residence experience. So if you're working in the medical field and you want people to draw their experience healing after an operation, or draw what's going on for you, that might be a way to really get at people's experiences and to give them a job too. And then the focus group comes where you would talk with the group and show what happened to you and then move from there. Artifacts, that's another way to do it, where I had somebody have all these different cards, and people would pick a card that represents them, or historical archives. Here's information from the medical library and pictures from back in the day. Now let's talk about what those pictures are and mean. And it's on the tables during the focus groups. There's so many different ways to do this, but I think really it's the conversation between the participants and you. And it takes some skill to, as a facilitator, to not have it just repeat an interview process in the focus group. Again, then you might as well do an interview. So if it's going to be you talking to Joe, you talking to Susie, you talking to Bakari, you could do that. But then what's the intent of a focus group? It's about you hearing from Bakari and Joe talking together about what it's like as a man in this experience, and oh, that happened to me too, really. And it provides that extra layer of depth that you might not have received if you just talked about Kari alone, for example. So that conversation between is really quite involved and hopefully pretty great. Let me pause for a second. Are there, Joanne, is there anything you wanted to add or share or say here?
I was wondering from the audience if any of you have actually conducted a focus group or were interested in conducting one, and if you had any questions about some of the types of different engagement you could have with your participants. I think I was a little bit amazed at this array of ideas here. I know for me, I've been a focus group participant as a science teacher, and it was sponsored by, I think, Vernier, those equipments for measuring experiments. And they just welcomed us. They had little name tags for us, and we had a breakfast, and it was a very low key type of event, but it was more of a conversation, like the last example that she has here. However, there was around 15 to 20 of us, so I didn't get to say very much. But just wondering if any of you had questions about the different forms of engagement for a focus group. And you can put your question in the chat box or just speak up.
Sorry, I can't even see if I've got, yeah, I did. Okay, hi, thanks so much for asking. So I actually am a qualitative researcher, although that is not how I think of myself. I'm a bioethics researcher, but I have qualitative training. As an anthropologist, it's ethnography and interviews. So focus groups potentially are one of my toolkit, right? In my toolkit, but I've only led one focus group. I would not consider myself to have any expertise. However, it is an important tool. This is why I'm here. I'm interested in developing that expertise. When I'm interested in your thoughts on composition of focus groups. When you have, when you want to bring participants together who have different backgrounds. So, for example, if I want to, I can't think of the word, engender, facilitate discussion between physicians and patients on something that they could potentially collaborate on. How would you structure that as a focus group, or would you even attempt to do it? Would you do it more as a community-based participatory approach?
Goodness, it's so hard to know, right? So let's just maybe talk it through and think about this, is how to really get patients and physicians talking together in this space. Is it something where it would be helpful to put people in dyads or pairing and then engage where it's a focus group of 3 as opposed to 8 faculty or 8 physicians and 8 students, or a group of 4 with 2 and 2 so that it's balanced in that way? Do you have thoughts about what might really allow people to really talk and get in there, but not feel too much pressure? Also, I'm the only patient. Oh no, what do I say? Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of problems, right? There's power dynamics, there's intimidation, there's the frustration of professionals, physicians who are, might wonder what, they want to talk with their peers, they don't want to talk with patients. So I'm wondering if there needs to be some stage setting, maybe there needs to be still large group format where people are working together towards goals, and then you break them into smaller groups. But I don't have any models for this, so I'm interested in your models. Anyways, I don't want to take up the time, but that's sort of one of the questions that I have.
I so appreciate that. And let's make sure when I'm sharing about resources, there's a particular book by Jory Hall that is about focus groups and culturally responsive environments. And I think your conversation about issues of power, and it's just so important. I mean, people have visions of doctors and does that live up, et cetera, all the power issues that are there. And if they're their particular doctor or somebody else's doctor, so it's a little bit removed, the relationship there matters. So I'll be sure to mention that, and we can talk more about it too when we get there. So that's really helpful to know what you're thinking about, and practically, Janet, thank you. Yeah. Excellent. So let's
we do have a few questions. So from what I understand is for focus groups, we want to make the environment as comfortable as possible. And any tips on doing that as far as where to hold a meeting, when to hold a meeting? Should you provide snacks, dinner? Also, what is the ideal number if you're talking about a broad range of topics and themes that could come up? Because I think a broad range provides that opportunity for this discussion. But Joanne just said, if you don't have the opportunity to collaborate or contribute, that kind of defeats the purpose. And also, how do you see focus groups moving forward via Zoom meetings, since we are meeting a lot more virtually?
Great points. That also might be helpful, obviously, for Janet too, as well as anybody working on focus groups. So you, to Joanne's important point, you have a focus group with 20 people. Not everybody's going to be able to talk and contribute. You want to make sure that everybody in the room can speak, and I have a slide later on exactly about what about the people who take up all the time and the energy and the space and kind of suck it out of the group, and what do you do and what are the strategies? But what I hear in your question, Jeff, is really what are you doing ahead of time as a researcher? And I think it really it goes to the invitation, right? What does that look like? What does that sound like? What does that affect? Please participate in the study. Are you giving resources and an Amazon gift card or something like that? Are you making people feel comfortable, welcome, and invested in wanting to answer the research question? For example, I know a lot of people will participate in a study because I care about that topic. I really am interested in what's happening with hereditary eye diseases, and I want to be a part of that. So they're invested in that topic. And so what can you do to make sure people are invested or interested, but then also that everything's clear? Just like when you're running a session like this, or when you're running any kind of program or event, just like the focus group, you want to make sure people are clear about how to get there, where to go, name tags, making sure that everybody knows where to sit, how to sit, what the food is available. Sitting now in the era of COVID, being all together in the space, or is it on Zoom? So doing things like that. When you shift to a digital environment, it is absolutely different. Just like when you teach or train in a virtual environment, absolutely different. So what are the things that you're doing to really engage people and to get people to talk? So kind of like what Janet was talking about, hey, I don't have models, right? So how are you designing this research project? So it really is about what is useful for you and the participants. You can set it up as a researcher. Your decisions matter. Every decision matters. So taking ownership for the research design and knowing that if you're using Strauss and Corbin and grounded theory design, your collection in a focus group could be altered based on what your needs are. And so sometimes we're going to come together, then we're going to do introductions all around so everybody knows each other. We're going to break off into pairs, talk about a certain question. Now we're going to come back in the focus group and chat together. Breakout rooms could be done in an online environment. You could also have breakout rooms in a physical environment where people just pair up on the side. Everybody then gets a chance to talk, to think about the answer to the question, then come back to the large group and think about what I want to share or offer in that large group that I might have felt, more comfortable sharing with my partner, but now that I've shared it once, got good feedback, now I'll share it with the large group. I think these are all important strategies to pay attention to. Joanne, I see it, the box flipping to you. So did you want to add to that?
Oh, right. Yeah. Janet had asked, we never talk about fun in the research design and data collection, even though science is fun. However, should focus groups be fun for participants? And should we be considering the social enjoyment dimensions of focus groups when designing them?
Mm-hmm. Janet, that's such a great question. Absolutely. To me, and you can probably see, I get very passionate about research and research that makes a difference, right? And so I always tell my students, if you're bored writing your paper, I'm going to be bored reading it. If you're bored putting your research protocol and your interview protocol together, they're going to be bored when they're there doing it, right? What is really exciting for you about the research question, what is going on for the participant, how to engage them. And it doesn't always have to be so, stone cold as we might have been socialized to do in some research, groups. But now I think people are, and qualitative research is opening up more, where people are about having the fun, as you mentioned, Janet, and what is really going to be useful to answer your question and gets at your research question, while also engages your participants so they're ready to share with you. They might share something, oh, I wasn't planning on sharing that, but that's the nugget that you really wanted. And so making sure people feel comfortable, safe in that environment to share with you, and engaged. And safety means something different for everyone. And so you will know your participants better than I would about what those aspects would be in order to create for that design. Janet, did you want to share more?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Oh, yes. I really appreciate that question. And I do think, there's absolutely positivists who do, lockstep, I want to do it. And sometimes you're confirming or disconfirming something. So you want to do it exactly like the past research study. And then there's other approaches that are absolutely more iterative and more constructivist, and really figuring out what's going on for each person in a different way, because that person's reality might be different than this other person's reality. So how can you kind of get in there and acknowledge the complexities of the different lived experiences that have happened with everyone? And your design really matters here. Thank you. Well, let's move on and see if some of the other slides help to kind of get into this. And I think that, Jeff, this speaks a little bit to what you were asking about before, is about recruitment before and after the focus group. So we'll talk in a minute about during and moderator roles and the observer roles. But before and after, the clarity is so important. Setting up the room with materials and the name tags and welcoming people, making them feel like they're in the right place and comfortable and welcome. That matters. It matters to you when you go to a dinner party on Friday night, whether that's virtual now these days or not, but it does matter for that. It matters for a research focus group as well. And then after, making sure that you are doing the items that you shared about in your IRB, but beyond IRB, beyond do no harm, thanking everybody for their time. They're giving you the gift of being able to complete your research. So that is really important. So making sure people feel that their contributions were valuable, whether or not you're going to pick up on it in your research paper or not, that they really did, you valued their participation. Share resources, again, counseling centers or medical resources that you should have for people, gift cards if it's in your IRB. I also think thank you notes make a difference. I know some people aren't about the US mail, snail mail, but I think actually some of the younger grad students that I work with are very into it. What? US mail? People don't do that anymore. That's pretty cool. So I don't know. It depends on you. Also, member checking, if applicable. So if you are going to ask people to confirm the transcript and make alterations, some researchers do that and say, here's the transcript. I'm going to share this with you. Please redact or edit or change anything you'd like. Some researchers don't do that because people might take out the very thing that could have been so exciting about the interview. So it just depends on your decisions as a researcher. Sometimes people will do that member checking and going back to participants later. We're going to come up with some basic themes and codes. We're going to come back to you and send you an email of these 5 items and what our initial thoughts are. And we'd love your feedback and on that. So I'll be contacting you in about 4 weeks, and please respond. We really would appreciate it, because this is going to really let us know if we're on the right track with what we heard from you today. And so it lets people know that email's coming, the member check is important, and not just to delete that email, or whatever you would do for a member check in that research process. I think also moderator roles. What is your role as a moderator? And then we're going to move to the observer. So what is your role of the moderator, and really thinking through that role? Also, if Janet and I are both moderating and we have Joanne as the observer, that is going to be really important that Janet and I have talked about what are the questions you're going to ask? What am I going to ask? Is it one where Janet asks all the main questions and I ask the follow-up questions? Is it where Janet asks question 1, I ask question 2, 3, 4, and we each are only responsible for those questions and any follow-up questions that might come from it? I think having a relationship with a moderator, just like when you're a professor or you're teaching and training, if you're doing it with somebody, that eye contact, kind of knowing what the other person is thinking, is helpful, but you can't get there unless you practice or know what the other person is thinking, and making sure that you both know what your roles are. I also think it's really important to create a list of engaging comments for the moderators. So what I often do with research teams is I'll bring my research team together and say, all right, now we're brainstorming comments, and just have a toolkit of different comments that could be used in the focus group. You certainly have your interview protocol, but let's say somebody says a few sentences and it really is intriguing. You really would like to know more about that. And you've already said, what else, I appreciate your point. That's great. Does anybody else have thoughts about this? You've already said that 8 times. How do you make sure you have in your repertoire a number of different comments that really get at people's what they're saying? Wow, I would love to hear more about that. Could you share more? So tell me more about what happened, so that you're engaging with that person. I also think in that space, it's also important for airtime. If there's always one person, I'm going to tell my whole big story and it's going to go on for 10 minutes, and then you're not going to be able to get through your interview protocol. How do you deal with that? How do you make sure your research team is ready for that and has a toolkit or a repertoire of different comments to mention when somebody like Penny continues to say, answer every question and just take up all this time? So then things like, excellent, I appreciate that. Who else has experienced something like that? Or do you have anything else to share? So you're kind of thanking that person for their contribution. You're really glad they did. And now you're pointing to the rest of the people in the group to make sure that they get a chance to talk. I also think it's important for moderators to pay attention to, what does off track mean? If you have an interview protocol or a focus group protocol, and it's how close do you stick to that? If it's structured, you stick very closely to it. If it's semi-structured, you can ask follow-up questions. And so for your study, if somebody starts to go and share a bit of a story over here, is that off track? Is that maybe the magic of what's really going on that could help inform your study in a way that you didn't anticipate prior? So off track could actually be something really important that could be a new contribution to the literature. So making sure you and your research team or you as a moderator really think through what that means to go off track, because sometimes it's hard in the moment as a facilitator to know and think, oh my gosh, I need to get to question 8. I have to get there. But yet the other facilitator might help to say, oh, wait, this is really important. We need to spend some time here. So thinking that through with somebody in the moment is tough. So thinking about it ahead of time is helpful. I also think what happens when people don't speak. So we talked about power issues before. And so when you have a patient who is, quiet or doesn't speak, international students I know often will not speak up in my class until I give enough time for everybody to speak, or I'll have smaller groups and then have people speak or ask people to speak. And I think there's different ways that people feel invited to speak that might be culturally relevant. So to pay attention to that as a professor with power issues, or also making sure that culturally that we're paying attention to what's going on for people and respecting that and understanding that, and then making sure that there's interactions and that the space allows for everyone to speak. Or you do the smaller groups and you do the breakout groups that you're recording or in online and in person, and then you bring it back, but making sure that all of those are recorded, or a little bit more in terms of the technical side, but you would have then all of those interviews and all of those conversations to then review. Do you have thoughts about the moderator role before we move to the observer role, or want to talk about that at all? We're good. All right, let's go to the moderator. All right, so I think mentally I already called you, Joanne, as the observer, so you are the observer. As Janet and I do this pretend focus group. So what is that role of the observer? I think it's actually underrated how important the observer really is. And we think, oh yeah, observations, but we don't often teach people how to do observations. And as an anthropologist, or I think Janet, you might have great insight. And I think it's really important to think about as a researcher, knowing who you are, knowing what you're looking for, knowing the different strategies. I think it's all really important. Often what I'll do with a research team is have us review a scene online, YouTube or a video of some scene. In the era of COVID, before we would just go visit the graduate library or go visit a space and then do the observation, but now we're doing it online. And so the group will all observe the same thing and then talk about, what did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel? What were the dynamics? What were the one up, one down dynamics going on? What were the ways people were trying to save face in that conversation? All the different things that were going on, race, gender, what's going on in this conversation, conflicts, verbal and nonverbal. I think observation, it's easy to think about the recording and the audio recording and the transcript, but what's actually happening with the nonverbals matters. As somebody with an MS in nonverbal communication, to me, it's something that really has to be paid attention to, because there are ways people start to fidget or get nervous. And is that impacting you, the moderator, or other people in the space? What's really going on there? Do you need to follow up with that participant? What about conflicts in the space? Are you prepared to, the moderator would address that, but as an observer, somebody gets upset and walks out of the room. Is it important for the observer to then go check on them or stay in the space? What happens in these interactions? So to think about the complexities, making sure also details like the recording is actually being recorded to the iCloud, so you'll get the transcript, or that your equipment is working right. I also want to just spend a second about field notes and taking the field notes that really might matter to the group. The observer is going to pay attention to very different things than the moderator. The moderator has these things about the interview protocol and the conversation and the interactions. The observer is then freed up to really pay attention to things like the nonverbals and all these things that we're talking about today, right? But some of the ideas for field notes there's books. Fretz and Shaw have a book on taking field notes. But one of the things I often tell students is to write your field notes on one side of the paper, and then later you can theme and code on the right side, so that space is freed up on the right side of your paper, and then you can take notes later on as a research team next to the field notes that are here. Is somebody going to use a computer and tick, 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 tick? Is that going to be disruptive to the team? Is it not going to be disruptive? Is it all handwritten? Drawing the seating charts could be a great idea, because you might forget that, you know, Joe actually sat here instead of here, and drawing that out might help, as well as with the recording as too. I also using participant pseudonyms are important and things like that. Oh, I did put the computer thing on the slide. Excellent. Do you have thoughts or questions about the observer or observers that you might have in a research team or research process? Just flip through to the next couple of resources slide and leave plenty of time for conversation. So I mentioned to Janet, and I wanted to mention to you all, this book by Jory Hall. And she has a 2020 book about culturally responsive approaches for qualitative inquiry and program evaluation. So she's somebody who takes the concept of culturally responsiveness and connects it to focus groups. What does that mean for us as researchers to make sure that we're being culturally responsive? What are the 10 things? And she goes through them all that are really important for researchers in a focus group environment. Instead of it being relegated to a chapter in a book or just a section, this is actually a great book that's all about focus groups. I also found that the this book by Fontana and Procos is really one that I draw on a bit. It talks about everything from the interview to the formal interview to the very postmodern interview and what that might look like. For me, that was something where I really dove into the archives of what could be available on the table, and with this women leadership group, went to the archives and pulled out different giveaways and stocks that they were selling, and the quilts that people made and years ago, and all this that was relevant to that particular group. And so from whether you're interested in formal or actually ideas that are more postmodern, where the group actually controls where the conversation goes, or if you want something semi-formal, it has all of that there for you. The Carey book is there, the Danner book is there, of course, listening and leading. This is my article that really compares the focus group to the interview and what I was able to get in from both of those. There's general qualitative work in higher ed monograph series, which is quite seminal in our field. That's just that one there. And then the Weiss book about learning from strangers and the art of method and qualitative interview studies. I mean, these are just some great resources that I want to make sure you have. But really, your decisions matter from beginning to end. And then how do you, of course, take this to do congruent analysis and all your tools? That's a conversation for another day. But with focus groups, I want to, again, make sure we have time to really talk about some of the questions that you might have about training your research team about focus groups, or writing the interview protocol, or thinking through, okay, so I don't have to stick with what I imagine a focus group is. You know, I should say, when I did a postmodern focus group versus the interview, I was at a conference and I presented the work, and one of the questions about this, which is why we go to conferences, somebody said, oh, I think it's just because you did focus groups over here and interviews over here that you received different content. And I don't think it was because, or I wonder if it really was because of the different design. And so I explored that more, and I did more member checks, and I actually met with somebody who runs focus groups regularly, who participated in this focus group that was the one that I had done. And she's like, oh my gosh, this was so wildly different than the focus groups I run on a regular basis, day-to-day basis. It just was very different. And because that creativity was there, it allowed me to think more deeply about how I could change focus groups so that it mattered to my particular group. So for your patients, for your doctors, what's important to them? What do you need to get from them? And how do you make sure that your focus group, you're designing it in a way that really gets at your ability to answer the research questions? So I'll stop there. What questions do you have, or do you want to talk with each other or share a little bit about your studies? Or also I want to make sure to come back to Janet if we were able to really answer that question, or you want to talk more about that. Jeff, I see you there. Yeah.
So one question I do have is that you made mention of recording from the observer role. Is the actual nonverbal something that you could really take a study on and publish and write on? I've never really thought of those in that manner.
Great question. Thank you. Yes, actually, the nonverbal, there's a whole area of study in nonverbal communication. And so people have looked at nonverbal communication across many different identities, right? And so when you are doing a study, and again, I'm going to pick on Janet just because you shared about your study, which I think was really important, about issues of power. So if you're paying attention to issues of power and you're looking at patient-doctor relationships, is there a way that nonverbal communication could really matter for a physician in those relationships, so that then when they go to their own practice and they're meeting one-on-one with patients, the research and the findings from your study could make a difference in terms of what they do, how they're trained, how they interact with patients, for example. And so I know we have some of the basics in the research already. You know, the eye contact matters. Did you listen to me? Did you, those things. But there could possibly be research questions that are more in depth for you to really explore in this study. And then also, I think as many of us do, here's your research study about all these different things, and then you take sections of it and publish them based on, what journal you're going to and based on the findings and everything. And so if you had a slice of this larger research study is about, follow up with aftercare for surgery. All right, so here's your study, but then I'm going to take a slice of that and answer that particular research question. But now I'm interested in the nonverbals. And so that could be a different slice that you go after to really talk about and address that and publish that finding. If if you find it useful and interesting and it pushes on the edge of what is known in the field, and sometimes it might be just obvious, but if it's not in the literature, then I think there's a way that it really helps to further that line of thinking with scholars, with physicians, just to know that that was important and this is what we found here. Yeah, thank you for that. Absolutely a lot of literature on nonverbal communication. There's also on verbal pauses. So when people do a lot of well, and kind of put themselves in that one down position, or is it a matter of, talking to a doctor, and so then I'm not coming across as clearly as my doctor might have wanted or needed. And what is that about? Is it about culture? Is it about gender? Is it about, respect? Is it about, and so what are the ways in which some of this could be really important in terms of like culturally relevant research, for example? Yeah, great. So we talked a little bit about the question about the different types of interviews and focus groups, and not necessarily having a lot of models. I hope that some of these provide some models that aren't the average ordinary that you would find. I mean, some are very traditional, and here's how you run a focus group and things to know and pay attention to. But again, you, the researcher, make a difference. Your questions, your approach, how you do it. And I want to, as a scholar, give you the freedom to say it's okay for you to deviate from how you were taught if that is important for your study. So to go ahead and do that, and to think about the design that really could get into the crux of that new original research that you're going for, that would really change the field and be helpful, as well as, I'm going to confirm, disconfirm, I need to do it exactly the same. And that's okay too. There's such an array of different approaches to qualitative research. And so again, your decisions matter. So I just appreciate you giving thought to how you're going to do it, so that way what you publish is really going to make a difference in the field. So thank you for that. What else?
I guess one other question, since everyone's being shy, is what's the importance of maintaining consistent focus groups? I know in qualitative research, you search and search until you hit the point of saturation. But if you're doing 2 groups that are the size of 10, then your last group's the size of 3, does that affect your findings? Is that something that you should consider as you move forward?
Great question, Jeff. Thank you very much. I think it absolutely depends on your research question and the types of focus groups you have, right? So if you have a group of patients and doctors and they're separate and they're different sizes, you treat them differently, that could be okay with your research design in mind. If your research design calls for them to be treated exactly the same, then you need to do that, right? I think your point about saturation, thank you, Tanya. Your point about saturation is an important one that really matters. And I also think paying attention to your, if you're running 5 different focus groups and you change it every time, can you really say that all 5 showed you this theme or this answer, this analysis that you have over here? I mean, you can't really, because you've altered it so much. So I would say as much as you can to try to stay the same, but I also have to say, as you do one, you start to modify, and you get better. You figure out what questions you didn't get to at the end that people really want to talk about, question number 2 and number 4, and not question number 1 and number 3. Okay, how do I modify it? Pilot studies are helpful to make sure that you're focusing on that. Pilot studies are also helpful in terms of really understanding the number, that sweet spot, right? Where if you drive a stick shift, right, it's not too much gas, it's not too much clutch, it's right at that sweet spot. So you want to make sure that you're getting that sweet spot. So doing the pilot studies really can help to understand that. But then also some things are out of your control. I'm going to do so let me stick with that point. So as you do them, you might modify it. And that is okay for some research designs. Some research designs, you can't do that. You have to be exactly the same in all of them. So in those cases, I would urge people to do a pilot study first, figure that out, so that then when you get to the study that you're really looking for, you have the trial or the pilot to go off of. You've fixed all those bugs, and then you do the research study. To your other question, it's about size. And so you have 10 people in each group, 8 people in each group, and only 2 show up that day. There's a snowstorm, whatever is going on. And that's just the way it is. So do you scrap it? Do you keep it? And I think that those are really complex questions to answer. And they could be different for each research study. It's important to keep it and do it and invite them back. No, it's important to do it and call it a focus group and number with 2 people. And then the others all had between 8 to 10 people, and just be very clear as an author, as a scholar, as you're writing it up, about what you did do and what happened and what didn't happen. I think that's where with qualitative, your trustworthiness comes into play, is to be very clear, transparent, and honest about what happened and what didn't happen. So to write it up in a way that you're paying attention to that, and also looking in some of these books, where have other studies found something similar and how did they address it, I think is they're all things to talk about and think through with your research team. Yeah.
I think I'm just going to jump in and touch on what Janet was asking about the fun and focus groups. Dr. Pasque had written an article on postmodern focus groups. And I think in that one, you had 3 focus groups with maybe 6 to 5 people in each group. And she mentioned the coffee table conversation that was generated during these focus groups, and that it led to a lot of rich insights with the participants, not just answering the questions of the moderator, but also having a dialogue about their own experiences and just referring to the questions once in a while. So I think that was the fun part, right? It was a fun conversation.
Thank you for reading it, by the way. Thank you. I appreciate it. And you're so right. I mean, so this design lended itself to have more of that coffee conversation and around the coffee table, or as I mentioned before, is at a dinner table or you're cooking together, or things like that. It depends on the group. And so sometimes that more informal environment might help to address the power issues, or leave the lab coats at the door. And here, now we're going to engage, or what are the things that are right for you. And that, yes, that coffee conversation and that relaxed environment actually allowed for people to talk to each other, and I wasn't the center. The questions were on the middle of the table. They could pick up the questions. Oh, let me ask question number 4. This sounds fun. And then they started to talk and engage with each other. But again, the design lent itself to that. So there's different ways and ideas about how to do that. But I really appreciate it, that conversation about making sure it's engaging and you're getting after what you would like, and people are enjoying the time together too. Research doesn't always have to be stuffy.
I want to hop in here real quick. I know we're up against the 1 o'clock hour. This conversation can go on, but I'm going to put up the course evaluation. Everyone in attendance today, if you would please take time to complete this. This is how we will track your CME credits going forward. Share that right now, but the conversation may continue.
I just wanted to thank Dr. Pasque so much for sharing your expertise on focus groups. It's wonderful having you here today, and it's great that we can establish this interprofessional collaboration between our 2 colleges as well.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been fun to talk with you all today. Appreciate it. Good luck with your research.
Well, with that being said, I will say today's session is over. Thank you for attending. I will stop the recording and stick around in case there are any questions, but other than that, have a wonderful day.